We've just heard a story, an extraordinary story, a very long story, I must admit, of encounter and healing and transformation, but also one of uncertainty and doubt and fear and isolation. It's a story that comes in the midst of three great stories in these weeks of Lent to prepare for Easter. Three great stories of transformation and encounter. Last week, Jesus encountered the woman at the well. Next week, Jesus will encounter the sisters Martha and Mary and raise their brother Lazarus from the dead. In today's story, we heard that Jesus was walking with his disciples, and we saw that Jesus sees this man. Jesus sees this man and goes to him and heals him with some clay and some water from the Pool of Siloam, which means sent. It's a miraculous story. It's a story of great healing, a story of great transformation. But one of the things that's interesting about the gospel today is that the miracle, that miracle of healing, miracle of giving sight to this man born blind, it's just the very beginning of the story that we heard. You might think that this dramatic, miraculous thing would be the climax, would be the closing scene, the end of the story. But no, this man was encountered by Jesus. He rubbed clay on his eyes, washed in the Pool of Siloam, and received his sight, all by verse 7 of this story. And yet we read all the way to verse 41, all 41 verses of the chapter 9 in John's Gospel. And I think this is important because this rest of the story that happens after the man receives his sight, is really the story of life, the story of the Christian life. This is the rest of the Christian story. This reading today of the man born blind who receives his sight through washing at the pool is a story it's a reading often used at baptisms. Because for each of us, at our baptisms, and for many of our baptisms, this really was the very beginning of our story as infants. Although for some of us, including our catechumens today, we will be baptized, our story will begin as adults, as it did for this man born blind. In our baptisms, we undergo a miraculous transformation, a miraculous washing, a miraculous healing, a transformation from sin into freedom, from death into new life, from darkness into light, into acceptance, into God's very life. Our names are inscribed in the book of life. And it happens in an instant. It's an amazing, miraculous, beautiful, transformative thing, but it is only the beginning of the story. And as those of us who are baptized, we know how the story has entailed for the rest of our life. It's a story that includes, yes, much joy and much grace and much hope and much love, but it also includes times of doubt, of uncertainty, of fear, of loneliness, of temptation, of struggle. There are times in our life when we can find it difficult to remember the graces that came with our baptism, to remember God's love for us, to remember that we have been healed, forgiven, saved. And that's why I think it's important that we hear today in our gospel the rest of the story for the man born blind. For yes, he was healed in an instant. He was transformed. He received his sight. He was embraced by Jesus, just like we each are in our baptisms. And yet, in the rest of his story, he continued to be challenged. He continued to experience moments of uncertainty, moments of isolation and even exclusion. He was thrown out of the community, thrown out of the synagogue. But we also know that Jesus stayed close to him through it all. And the man continued to be transformed. He continued to grow in stature. He continued to come to know the one who had healed him in a moment, but was continuing to reveal himself throughout the rest of his story, throughout the rest of his life. the man born blind, after he received his healing, at first he only knew that there was this man called Jesus who had healed him. And then he began to know him as a man from God, a prophet who had shown many signs. And then as Jesus continued to seek him out, even after the man had been thrown out of the synagogue, as Jesus continued to encounter him, continued to see him, continued to love him, the man was able to come to know finally Jesus not only as a healer, not only as a prophet, but the Son of God, his Lord and his Savior, the one he could worship, the one who he could put all of his trust, the one whom he could come to know and to love in return. Yes, the man was given sight to his bodily eyes in an instant, but the work of gaining clarity of sight to the eyes of the soul is a work of the lifetime. It is the rest of our story. For we too have our own rests of the story. Sometimes we are the disciples in today's reading. We wrongly assume the sinfulness of others based on one characteristic or another, and so fail to see their dignity and goodness. Sometimes we are the Pharisees who hold maybe too tightly to our own ways of doing things, and so fail to see the goodness that Christ is doing, even on the Sabbath, in our lives or in the lives of others. Sometimes we are the parents who find it hard to speak the truth of God's work in our world, God's work in our own families. And sometimes we are the man born blind. We have come to know very well the love of God in our lives, what God has done for us, the ways in which God has made his love present to us. We have come to know intimately the love that God shares to us through his Son and through whom we love. And we can speak very freely and very openly and very courageously of that love to others, to the world, in spite of all their persecution. We know we have been saved in the waters of the Pool of Siloam, and we feel sent forth to share that love with those around us. But wherever we are in the rest of our stories, in the ups and downs of this Christian life, we all can be confident that Jesus will continue to seek us out. Jesus will continue to make himself known to us and through us if we are willing to open ourselves to him. At the beginning of this gospel reading, the disciples asked Jesus whether it had been the man or his parents who had sinned, that he was born blind. And Jesus says, neither he nor his parents, but it is so that the works of God might be made visible through him. God uses us in all of the ways that he has made us. He uses our hands and our wits, our talents, our personalities, our quirks, our misgivings, our doubts, our weaknesses, our strengths. He uses those things in our lives which we might assume would get in the way of living this life well, of learning how to love. God uses it all so that his works might be made visible through us. Candidates and catechumens, in a particular way, you are embarking on this story of the man born blind. You will be made whole. You will be transformed in a moment here in the Easter sacraments in a few weeks. We thank you for your witness. We thank you for your conviction. We thank you for your courage. And we also know a thing or two about your doubts, your uncertainties, your struggles, and of your hope. We hope you know of our prayers and our gratitude as you continue to prepare for the Easter sacraments, as you continue to enter into this community of faith, just as the man born blind did, and as some of you receive your baptisms. It'll be a miraculous moment of healing and of transformation and of grace and of joy. And it is a moment that'll just be the beginning of the rest of the story. This Christian story, your story of coming to know Jesus, coming to trust Jesus, coming to love Jesus, and of sharing that love with the world.